why entire nations become obsessed with football. In December 2022, something extraordinary happened in Argentina. After Argentina won the World Cup, an estimated 5 million people flooded the streets of Buenos Aires. Roads became impassable. Helicopters struggled to escort the team through the city. People climbed monuments, traffic lights, and rooftops. Strangers hugged, cried, and celebrated together. For a brief moment, politics disappeared. Social class disappeared. Personal differences disappeared. An entire nation seemed to move as one. And Argentina wasn't unique. The same thing happened in France in 1998, Germany in 2014, Spain in 2010, Italy in 2006. Again and again, football transforms millions of separate individuals into a single emotional crowd. But why? Why can a game make people cry? Why does a goal scored by someone you've never met feel like a personal victory? Why do billions of people become emotionally invested in an event that has absolutely no effect on their survival? Most people think they know the answer. People love sports. But that explanation barely scratches the surface, because football isn't just entertainment. It's one of the oldest psychological forces in human history, wearing a modern disguise. And once you understand that force, football begins to look very different. To understand football, we first need to understand ourselves. Human beings often describe themselves as rational creatures. But for most of our existence, survival had very little to do with being rational. It had everything to do with belonging. For more than 95% of human history, people lived in small tribes. These groups provided protection, food, knowledge, and social support. Alone, a human was vulnerable. Together, humans became one of the most successful species on Earth. Your tribe wasn't just your community. It was your identity. It told you who you could trust, who you should fear, who you would protect, and who would protect you. The human brain evolved under these conditions for tens of thousands of years. As a result, modern humans are still wired for tribal life. The world has changed. Our brains haven't changed nearly as much. This creates an interesting problem. The ancient brain still wants tribes, but modern life often provides fewer opportunities to experience them. And that's where football enters the story. Football gives people something incredibly powerful: a tribe. Think about what happens when someone becomes a fan. At first, they simply watch games, then they learn the players, then the history, then the rivalries. Eventually, something changes. The team becomes part of their identity. You can hear it in the language fans use. We won. We lost. We need a better defense. Notice something strange. The fans never stepped onto the field, yet they speak as if they participated. Psychologically, they did. Researchers call this social identity theory. The idea is simple. People define themselves partly through the groups they belong to: nationality, religion, political affiliation, profession, sports teams. These identities become extensions of the self. When the group succeeds, people experience pride. When the group fails, they experience disappointment. The brain often treats group outcomes as personal outcomes, and scientists have actually observed this happening. In one famous line of research, psychologists discovered something called basking in reflected glory. After victories, fans become significantly more likely to wear team merchandise. They talk more about the team. They use the word we more often. They actively associate themselves with success. But after defeats, many fans do the opposite. They distance themselves from the team. Suddenly, we lost becomes they lost. It's a subtle shift, but it reveals something important. The brain cares deeply about tribal status, and football gives us a way to experience that status without ever entering the game. But football doesn't just create tribes, it creates rivals. And rivalry is one of the oldest forces in human history. Anthropologists studying tribal societies discovered that groups often became more united when facing competition from outsiders. A common opponent strengthens internal bonds. The distinction between us and them becomes clearer. Football reproduces this mechanism almost perfectly. Every team needs an opponent. Every rivalry reinforces identity. Every match becomes a symbolic battle between competing tribes. Of course, modern football is far more peaceful than historical conflict, but psychologically, many of the same mechanisms remain active. The emotional intensity comes from the fact that the brain takes symbolic competition surprisingly seriously, and nowhere is this more obvious than during the World Cup. For a few weeks every 4 years, football becomes something much larger than sport. Club loyalties temporarily disappear. National identity takes center stage. Suddenly, millions of people who rarely think about patriotism find themselves emotionally invested in their country's performance. Flags appear everywhere, national anthems feel meaningful, victories feel historic, defeats feel personal. Why? Because national identity is one of the largest tribes most people will ever belong to. The World Cup transforms that identity into a global competition, and human psychology responds exactly as it evolved to respond. Consider what happened in France. When France won the World Cup in 1998, millions celebrated across the country. Commentators described the victory as a moment of national unity. People from different backgrounds suddenly found themselves sharing the same story. For a brief moment, they belonged to something larger than themselves, and that's one of the most powerful experiences human beings can have, belonging. Neuroscience helps explain why. Studies suggest that social connection activates reward systems in the brain. These systems evolved because belonging increased survival. A connected human was safer than an isolated one. The result is that social bonding literally feels rewarding. Football fans aren't simply enjoying a game, they're experiencing connection. And connection is one of the deepest psychological needs humans possess. But football affects more than emotions, it affects the body. Researchers studying major tournaments have found increases in stress levels during important matches. Heart rates rise, blood pressure increases. Some studies have even reported spikes in cardiovascular emergencies during exceptionally tense games. Think about that. A football match can physically affect people who aren't even playing. The brain reacts as though something important is happening. Because psychologically something is. Identity is being challenged, status is being contested, the tribe is under pressure, and the body responds. But football's influence extends far beyond psychology. Its roots stretch deep into history. Thousands of years before modern stadiums existed, ancient civilizations organized competitive games. The ancient Greeks held the Olympic Games. These weren't merely athletic contests, they were cultural events, religious events, political events. People travelled enormous distances to participate and watch. Entire city-states invested prestige in victory. The games created identity. They reinforced social bonds. They transformed competition into ritual. Sound familiar? Because football serves many of the same functions today. The technology has changed. The psychology hasn't. In fact, some historians argue that sports may have helped societies channel competitive instincts into safer forms. Instead of fighting, groups could compete symbolically. Instead of warfare, there was a game. Honor still mattered. Status still mattered. But the battlefield became a field. This doesn't mean sports eliminate conflict. Sometimes they amplify existing tensions. One of the most famous examples occurred in 1969, after a series of World Cup qualifying matches between El Salvador and Honduras. Political tensions escalated into a brief military conflict known as the Football War. Football didn't cause the war. The underlying problems already existed. But the matches became symbols of national identity and resentment. The fact that a sport could become so politically significant reveals something remarkable. Football is never just football. It often represents something much larger: identity, pride, history, belonging. This becomes especially clear during the World Cup. The tournament is often described as the biggest sporting event on earth. Billions of people watch. Entire nations follow every result. But what makes it so powerful isn't the competition itself. It's the story. Humans are storytelling creatures. We understand reality through narratives: heroes, villains, underdogs, redemption, failure, triumph. Football contains all of them. Every tournament becomes a giant story unfolding in real time. There are favourites expected to win, underdogs nobody believes in, unexpected victories, shocking defeats, moments that become part of national memory. Consider Argentina's 2022 victory. For many fans, it wasn't simply about winning a trophy. It was the culmination of years of anticipation, a story decades in the making. The ending mattered because people had emotionally invested themselves in the narrative. And narratives are powerful. The human brain pays attention to stories because stories help us understand the world. Football gives us stories with something rare: uncertainty. Nobody knows how the story ends, and uncertainty captures attention. Neuroscientists have repeatedly found that uncertainty increases engagement. When outcomes remain unknown, the brain becomes more alert. Every pass matters. Every mistake matters. Every goal matters. Football continuously exploits this ancient feature of human psychology. But perhaps the most fascinating thing about football is that the obsession isn't really about football. Football is simply the vehicle. The deeper force is humanity's need for meaning. Imagine a world without shared symbols, without collective rituals, without common stories, without belonging. Such a world would feel strangely empty. Civilizations are built on shared identities. Cultures are built on shared narratives. Communities are built on shared experiences. Football succeeds because it brings all of these elements together. It creates a modern ritual, a place where identity, competition, storytelling, and belonging converge. The game becomes a mirror. And when billions of people look into that mirror, they aren't really seeing football. They're seeing themselves. They're seeing instincts that evolved long before stadiums existed. The same tribal psychology that once helped small groups survive. The same need for connection that shaped human evolution. The same search for meaning that has followed humanity throughout history. This is why entire nations become obsessed with football. Not because football is uniquely important, but because it reveals something uniquely human. A football match lasts only 90 minutes, but the forces behind it are tens of thousands of years old, and perhaps that's the greatest mystery of all. What appears to be a simple game is actually a window into the human condition, a reminder that beneath our technology, our cities, our politics, and our modern identities, ancient instincts continue to shape what we feel. The World Cup doesn't create those instincts. Football doesn't invent them. It simply brings them to the surface, and for a few extraordinary weeks, billions of people experience the same truth. We have always been tribal. We have always searched for belonging. We have always needed stories larger than ourselves, and sometimes those stories arrive in the form of a ball crossing a line.